Brian Asamoah, Esezi Otomewo, and all kinds of other guys really stepped up on Christmas Eve against the Giants. Let's talk about that and some of the other things that really ailed the offense and defense in this game. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings, and thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. This show is available on Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app, and this episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise, then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. And Locked On Vikings listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON in all caps in the game. So I want to focus on some youngsters today, but we'll get to some other overall insights from the tape. There's some questions from Twitter Tuesday that I couldn't really answer that I feel like I can answer now. Some really interesting stuff on the Vikings Giants tape that the Vikings are still trying and kind of experimenting, and their defense is in such a weird state of flux, but they're trying to become a more man coverage style of team. And we'll see if it continues to be their big plan throughout the rest of the season. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what was really ailing the offense. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to say about the game that Kirk Cousins had, some good, some bad. So we'll get into that as well. But first, the youngsters, all right? Asamoah, Otomewo, Metellus coming in, Duke Shelley. The Vikings had some pretty significant contributions, especially on defense. But you could even say Ed Ingram, who's I think has really taken a step forward in the last few games. All these guys kind of having an impact on the way the Vikings played in this game. Of course, Asamoah, you remember the fumble and the big play. But he really looked like he was seeing the field. The game looked a little slower to him in this game, and maybe he had. He's taken some steps there to be able to enable and facilitate that kind of playmaking. He rotated in a lot for Kendricks, who was a little banged up and has a high snap count. And the Vikings kind of said that they would be limiting those players. One really interesting thing that they did, though, and by the way, if you want to know more about Brian Asamoah, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. There's an Asamoah video from the Colts game that is free to watch, and I think a lot of the same things were still happening. I still think that that's a pretty good summary of Brian Asamoah, so go check that out. But one of the interesting things that they did on defense was a big dime package. Now, the Vikings have been playing a lot more cover one, a lot more man coverage. Same thing in this game, a ton of man coverage. And you'd think you'd be able to get away with that against Richie James and whatever Isaiah Hodgins, dudes that weren't even on teams. But of course, the Giants totally shredded them. And so what I think happened is really a lot more on the linebackers than it is on the corners, which is different from the way I felt when I was watching the game live. But what I thought was interesting was how often it was Metellus basically replacing Jordan Hicks in the nickel package. If you just take nickel with Shannon Sullivan in and two linebackers, 4 guys down, take Hicks off, put in Josh Metellus. Now you have 3 safeties, 3 corners, 1 penny linebacker. Right, it's not penny, 1 linebacker, and then your 4 defensive linemen, your principal 4 guys. The Vikings went to that package a good amount, and it got Metellus on the field. And I think that was probably the package that they really wanted to use with Scene. I bet when Scene went down, they were bummed because that's the stuff that they drilled a lot in training camp, although I think it was Scene or Metellus, as it were, replacing Shannon Sullivan instead, and it's just a big nickel. But this was a big dime. Sullivan and Metellus were on the field, along with the usual other 4 defensive backs. So that was pretty interesting. And I thought when it was just up to kind of man covering, those guys did well enough. But when it was cover one, especially cover one lurk, which is where you've just got a guy underneath trying to pick something off, right? That guy's job is to be in the middle and essentially be everybody's inside help, which is a lot to ask of him. And cover one is a notoriously difficult coverage for players to execute. And if you can't execute, you probably shouldn't be calling cover one. Now, the Vikings are, I think it's a good idea for them to call cover one despite the execution issues, because they've got just as many execution issues everywhere else. So you might as well call the coverage that pays a whole bunch of dividends. But the lurk player, this was often Hicks, this would be Kendrick, sometimes it's a safety. If it's cover one robber, kind of the same thing, but it's a safety coming down and doing it. They were just slow to a lot of stuff. And so you'll have things like Duke Shelley or Chin and Sullivan playing with outside leverage, right? Because if they're kind of shaded, cheating a little bit to the outside, and the route breaks inside of them, there should be a guy there ready to pick that off. In fact, you maybe even want the quarterback to have to make that throw. That's a difficult throw, kind of overlaying it over a linebacker, depending on how sticky and tight you manage to get. But if that guy isn't there, or if he bid on play action, Jordan Hicks let up a huge play doing that once, or if they've flowed to the wrong side or something like that, then suddenly they're out, and now you're relying on help that isn't there, and you're going to give up a huge catch. A lot of the production came down to that, and in particular, I bring that up because of Duke Shelley. Duke Shelley had a game I like a lot more watching the tape than I did watching live, like a lot more. He definitely took his lumps. He had some moments where he just got beat by Richie James, and that's not very good. And when he was up against Darius Slayton too, he was very clearly outmatched by a wide receiver like of that caliber, which there's wide receivers of a better caliber that will hit the Vikings schedule. So to everybody's questions about should it be Dantzler or something like that, I don't think he has played well enough to earn that sort of consideration. I think he's played well enough to earn the consideration to maybe usurp like a Caleb Evans and be like a backup corner. I think he's played that well. I'm like on the fence about, right? I would say that that's 50-50 right now, at least if I were in charge, but I'm not. So who cares? I also want to shout out Esezi Otomewo. He got in a whole bunch after James Lynch got hurt. He figures to probably get in some more. Kyrie's Tonga as well. And he had some of the uppiest ups and some of the downiest downs. Otomewo had a couple of really great plays and a couple of just absolutely awful ones. I think the Saquon Barkley touchdown that happened at the end of the game, that then they had the 2-point and stuff. Otomewo had quite a strong hand in that one. Now, Bynum took a bad angle. Kendrick should be able to get off a block. Darius Smith was late to peek off of his block. Like, other issues happened, but Otomewo got really, really sledded at the point of attack by a double team in a way that, like, look, a double team, you're not going to just, like, bench press a double team unless you're, Vita Vea, but he got really cooked on it to the point where they could actually take him up to Eric Kendricks, and that's exactly what they want to do. You got to be able to deny that. So some rough moments for Otomewo, some better moments for him. I think he's a really interesting guy to see if he can kind of become that like 3-4 defensive tackle, like 3-tech type that we really want, like 4-eye type that we really want. This is a world where we don't have a lot of space for, goes back to the thing I was talking about yesterday, like the Armon Watts thing. That sort of Sheldon Richardson, Armon Watts type, like quickster, pass rush only defensive tackle. There's not really a place for that in this defense. They all got to be run stuffers. They all got to be Dalvin Tomlinsons. So if we can see something better from Otomewo there, I really like his prospects. But there's a ways to go with him at least. I could shout out youngsters all day, and maybe I will. We'll keep talking about that. We'll get into some of the other things that plagued the defense, although I think the cover one thing's the biggest thing. And then, of course, we'll talk about some of the things that went wrong on offense as well. First things first, though, I know you guys, and I know that you love to play things like franchise mode in Madden, things where you like to, get your team together, draft, manage the salary, take your franchise to the Super Bowl. That is what Ultimate Football GM is for. You have to hire the right coaches. You have to make the right trades, draft picks, navigate free agency and markets, and navigate a salary cap and all of that in a challenging and realistic game world. We have a little league at Locked On. It's a really fun app to get into. It's definitely my latest phone addiction. So head on over to the App Store, get Ultimate Football GM. You can go to ultimate-gm.com, or you can just look up Ultimate Football GM in the App Store. And Locked On Vikings listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On, all caps. So make sure you check it out today. Once again, download the game. You can visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Start your dynasty today. There's one more youngster that I want to shout out, and it's Ed Ingram. Look, Ed Ingram has had a lot of ups and downs this year, right? But I think in the last few games, he's sort of slipped under the radar, and in a very good way. I think that his run blocking has continued to be really, really excellent. I think his pass blocking, while certainly not consistent, I would not use the word consistent to describe Ed Ingram. The frequency of the bad plays is going down, and the frequency of the good plays is going up. That is the way that I would describe this. And it's the way it kind of goes with O-line. You're going to be whoever you are, and you're going to lose the way that you lose. But I think Ingram he's done a better job of being more responsible with balance and his weight, getting out in front of him. And he's been really, really good. This game was like a zone run clinic from the whole Vikings offensive line. Everybody was phenomenal at it. The only guy that I would say didn't have a good game in zone run blocking was Schlottman. And even he had his moments, and he had a lot of other moments in pass pro where he was absolutely dusted by Dexter Lawrence. That was a backup that I would not say played admirably, if you ask me, but really good zone blocking across the board, even from him, and especially from Ingram. And I think a little bit more consistency in pass pro than we were seeing, back in September, October from him. So it's really encouraging. And I guess I would be remiss if I did a segment about young players helping the Vikings and didn't mention Christian Darrisaw and Justin Jefferson. I don't have to, you guys know. But of course, Justin Jefferson, he's just outrageous. Everything he does is the best version of that thing you've ever seen. He's such a complete skill set, and he's so good at every single thing about being a wide receiver. It's just jaw-dropping, and I don't want to just get lost gushing about Justin Jefferson. Instead, I'll get lost gushing about Christian Darrisaw, who, boy, we missed him. Blake Brandell played well for a backup, I think, but Darrisaw was on another level in this game, especially when he went up against Kayvon Thibodeau, who is definitely a more kind of speedy type rusher. The thing about Darrisaw that really strikes and captures me is how well he moves for his size. He is so fleet of foot that not only can he get out there, there's a clip I posted on Twitter of a screen where he, got out there. He influenced three people on that play, including kind of finishing off a pancake that I think Brian O'Neill started on O'Shane Jimenez. But also in the tight quarters of pass protection, when he's tasked with meeting upfield with somebody like Thibodeau or somebody like Esezi Otomewo, who actually went out late in this game, but went up against Christian Darrisaw a lot. Or back last week, like Yannick Ngakoue, guys that want to use that speed, want to kind of get you upfield and get you off balance. You have to have really good footwork to get to the spot that you need to get to counter that rush, and still have your weight in the right place and not be kind of out over your feet where you can get countered. And he's so good at doing that. And it makes it so hard to attack him because you can't exactly attack him by using space. He moves too well for that. You certainly can't attack him by using power. He's a brick wall with a sledgehammer on it. What do you do? And Darrisaw's taken a couple L's this year. Who hasn't? Every tackle gets one eventually, but he is really something special, truly one of the best young tackles in the league. And it's so exciting to have that stalwart left tackle bookend, health permitting. This guy should be a Viking for a decade. I really believe that. And I would be advocating to extend him now if that weren't expressly against the rules to do. I want to talk strategy a little bit. The way the Giants play is very unique, very blitz heavy, and there is a non-zero chance we end up against the Giants, especially if we don't win out. We maybe lose a 3 seed. They're the 6 seed. That could be the wild card matchup. So I think it's worth going over how the Vikings attacked them and whether or not that strategy is something that they can run back next time. And then we can move on to Packer mode tomorrow. So we'll get into that. But first, Audible has a whole new slate of podcasts that I am very excited about. You will actually be able to find a preview episode of one of those podcasts called The League on Locked On NFL. It is narrated by Richard Sherman and sports broadcaster Taylor Rooks. It's an 8-part docuseries about the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories connected to football, all the way from back in the 1940s to the present. If you liked the history doc that I did on Patreon, you'll love this. Like, for example, the 1977 Cowboys brought in Bruce Lee's protege to teach their defense martial arts and usher in a new approach to the way the league trained. Each story offers equal part history, entertainment, and social commentary. Head on over to Locked On NFL for a bonus episode of The League, or you can just catch the whole series wherever you get your podcasts. It's available now. Audible. Get in the game. So some deeper stuff that I noticed in this game, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, for one, their zone run game was just like working really well, and it helped a lot of others like explosive stuff to facilitate. And when they weren't like just screwing up, like there was a sequence in this game where Adam Thielen ran the wrong route twice. Thielen, veteran of veterans, ran the wrong route twice. Of course, you probably remember the 4th and 2. I explained that on the Monday episode. But if you missed that, that was 4th and 2. You're going, why did they go deep? Well, both of those guys ran a go. Somebody was supposed to run an out route, or call it like an Omaha is what they call it. This you're supposed to have a high-low on that kind of sprint out play, but both of them ran the go. And on the play right before it, 3rd and 3, the Vikings tried to run mesh, and both Hawkinson and Thielen ran a shallow cross. One of those guys was supposed to run a middle spot route, if that's mesh the way that I understand it. That's not necessarily always that. There's some versions and all kinds of other plays that the Vikings have that kind of build off of mesh. But whatever it is, you're never supposed to be running the same route as another guy. That's never right. So something went wrong there, whether that one was Thielen or Hawkinson's fault or whatever, but something has gone wrong there. And that happened twice in a row. That's a concern. You've got to talk about that in the week. That can never happen again. So when they weren't screwing that stuff up, they had a really interesting game plan coming into this. Now, Wink Martindale and the Giants, famous for blitzing. We talked about that a little bit with Patricia Traina on Crossover Thursday. But they are like, they love to blitz and they have no fear about it. They will blitz 8 people on you. They'll go cover 0 on 2nd and short. They'll do anything. And it makes them very formidable because you just never know when that's coming. You never get a second to breathe. It could always be a pressure. But if you can counter those, you can punish them all day long. I'm going to go way deep and go back to 1969 when the Vikings had lost in the playoffs the year before to the Baltimore Colts, who employed a very similar strategy. Now the Colts were way more irresponsible about it, and we weren't quite as dialed in to exactly what is and isn't okay to get away with back in the late 60s. But they had some blitz counters prepared for the next time they played the Colts. They had them week 2 in the next season, 1969 season that went to the Super Bowl. And they brought out better blitz counters. If you can really counter those blitzes and punish those blitzes, you can force a team into a terrible Sophie's choice. Nowadays, teams will then have to back off the blitz and kind of become this version of themselves that's not them, and they get that much easier to beat. Back in the Baltimore game, they just lost by 50 because they didn't have another pitch. So they just kept blitzing into the blitz counters and just got killed. But the Vikings had a lot of interesting blitz counters, a lot of middle sit stuff or middle search, like just go into the zone, turn around and catch it. Call it like a heat route, or I think it's a Miami route, and heat's one of the concepts that they use there. But just like line up, go find a soft spot in the middle of the zone and turn around, get ready for the ball. And that can be a great blitz counter, because if it is a fire zone blitz, which Wink Martindale loves to use, and he will even fire zone, he'll keep 2 safeties on the roof so you don't get like, a big long 70-yard touchdown off the blitz. But he'll just keep like 2 safeties way high. He'll blitz everybody else. You'll have 30 yards of space between levels of the defense, really easy for wide receivers to get in and turn around. You just have to pick up the blitz. And when the Vikings picked up the blitz, they were able to find that stuff, and they were able to find, basics over the middle, digs and stuff. A ton of Justin Jefferson things. A lot of that was Hawkinson, and that was part of the reason I think Hawkinson had the big day. He just played really well, though. I mean, he just had just won a lot of routes. And there was a lot of manufactured stuff that went through Hawkinson where he found, a great little move on a tight end screen, or just beating a guy to the first down marker when that's his job on the play. He's just got to run a little slide, catch the ball in the flat, beat the defender to the first down marker on 3rd and 6, and he can do it. All of that, great game from Hawkinson, but part of it too was the way the Giants blitzed. I think the Vikings had a great plan for how to counter it, and I think they could have scored a lot more if they just stopped running the wrong dang thing all the time. And they stopped shooting themselves in the foot. If the Vikings can get rid of their bozo gene, and that's a lot to ask, right? But if they could just stop bozoing it up, this is my less nice version of Kevin O'Connell's, if we can just put 60 minutes together, we haven't put 60 minutes together yet. And that's our goal right now, right? That's his nice way of putting it. My less nice way of putting it is stop screwing up and you're one of the best teams in the league. Just stop messing up your own thing. You can line up when it comes down to just mano-y-mano. Christian Darrisaw can line up on anyone, right? Justin Jefferson can line up on anyone. Patrick Peterson is man-covered dudes all year. Zadarius Smith and Daniil Hunter have been living in the backfield this year, and it's just that the balls have come out too fast for them because the coverage is so bad on the back end. If everybody could do their job and be at least below average, be a top 30 guy at their position, right? Just don't be a catastrophe that gets you laughed at the next week. This could genuinely be one of the best teams in the league, but they have not been able to consistently do that. And so they're not seen as one of the best teams in the league. We'll get into that, I think, a lot more with Peter tomorrow on Crossover Thursday. But for now, the last thing that I want to bring up is Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins had a fascinating game, and that may sound backhanded. It might be a little backhanded. Ups and downs for Kirk in this one. I think there were a couple of instances, and we've seen this a little bit this year, way less. This was everywhere in 2021. It drove me nuts. Of him not coming off of alerts fast enough. He played greedy. And I don't mind greedy. I don't think it caused problems in this game, but I don't think I would necessarily ask him not to play greedy. He's just got to pick his spot better, I think. But, if there is an alert on a play, mesh is a great example. Mesh, you alert the clear out through, or sometimes it's a corner. It can be a whole bunch of things, double move or something. You alert it. You say, okay, in the middle of my drop back, I'm looking at that and I'm just seeing, hey, did they completely blow their coverage? And is that going to be wide open? And if not, you kind of come off it right away. But he would get all the way to the top of his drop, sit, wait, pat the ball, wait for that corner to come open. And it's like TJ Hawkinson running a corner route. Well, everything else has developed, and you let a really long stunt from Wink Martindale develop, and now there's a guy in your face. You got to get off of that faster. And I think he's been holding on things a little bit too long in this game. And in general, a little bit this year. That has led to some pressure and stuff. That said, I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the really sweet stuff that Kirk Cousins did. The big 3rd and 1, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, where he gets absolutely drilled, hits a corner route. This is on the game-winning drive. On the drive before that, the Justin Jefferson touchdown. A lot has been made about Justin Jefferson's route on that play, and Kevin O'Connell explained it on the Pete Bursich segment that he does on the Vikings YouTube channel and Vikings Entertainment Network every week. So go listen to O'Connell explain why that Justin Jefferson route was cool. But from Cousins' perspective, that was really cool because that was a really similar throw to the one he threw that near interception on, that one that should have been picked, but Thielen broke it up. That was reviewed and overturned. It was kind of the same throw. You have an in-breaking route, safety's crashing down on it, and there's a corner undercutting it, and you kind of have to lead the receiver out of that bracket. And Cousins didn't do that well enough. The rookie corner undercuts it, should have intercepted it, couldn't hang on. You kind of get a lucky break. And you're going right back to that exact same situation. And you have to have the utmost faith that Justin Jefferson's going to clear it. Right after you got punished for having that faith. Cousins used to turtle so much on that, and to have that anticipation, plus it was the backside of the read. That Justin Jefferson touchdown was not even like, I think that was like the third read on the play, but he came off the front side because of the way the coverage was over there, and it was correct to do that, to come over, find Justin Jefferson, and throw with insane anticipation. A lot of great anticipation throws in this one. And to do that despite that kind of anticipation burning you earlier in the game, that sort of goldfish memory thing, that bodes very, very well for a team that it seems like it's kind of prone to some meltdowns and needs to kind of figure out how to pull itself out of there. That kind of goldfish memory is a big deal and helps you do it. So ups and downs for Kirk Cousins. Certainly not the game I would point to as his most representative of 2022. But hey, it was enough to get the job done, I suppose. But that sort of logic will not convince everybody. It certainly hasn't convinced Peter Bukowski, who we'll have on the show tomorrow. Crossover Thursday, we'll talk to him about this sort of low octane Vikings Packers game. I mean, they need it. They're in the playoff hunt, and they're fighting for their lives. The loss, they're eliminated. We're thinking like 2 or 3 seed maybe. Like it's way lower stakes for us, but you still go play it, and the 1 seed's still in reach. Still possible. So of course you got that to play for. We'll talk about all that tomorrow. Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast Network. In the meantime, check out Locked On Sports Today. All headlines, biggest games, all the big things going on in the wide world of sports. Check me out on patreon.com/Luke Braun NFL. I'll see y'all tomorrow on Crossover Thursday. And as always, Skol.